Jack nodded slowly, though his throat constricted with unspoken fear that seemed to wrap around his windpipe like a tightening rope, making it difficult to breathe or speak. From that day forward, they remained in town, abandoning their wandering ways and the freedom of the open desert they had once known. Jack pursued every available job he could find in that dusty frontier town, hauling heavy crates from dawn until the sun blazed overhead at its hottest point, repairing stables with his bare and bleeding hands that became rough and calloused, lifting stones until his back screamed in protest and his muscles burned with exhaustion. Whatever work would pay for medicine and the modest shelter they desperately needed to survive. During the long daylight hours that stretched endlessly, he worked until his body nearly gave out completely, pushing himself beyond any reasonable limit that other men would accept. At night, when the desert cooled and stars appeared, he returned to Neil's bedside, his footsteps heavy with exhaustion that made each step an effort, wiping perspiration from her fevered forehead with a damp cloth, listening to each labored breath as though it were the delicate thread binding her to existence itself, the only thing keeping her in this world. Neil observed him through those endless sleepless nights, her dark eyes following his movements in the dim lamplight that flickered and cast dancing shadows on the rough wooden walls. Her heart seized by terror she had never experienced before in all her years as a warrior who had faced death many times. Not the terror of physical agony or the pain of battle wounds that she had learned to endure, but the deeper terror that time would run out before she could truly forgive him for the pain he had caused, before she could let go of the anger and hurt that still lived inside her chest. And in that unforgiving desert landscape that stretched endlessly in all directions, where nothing grew except the hardiest plants and survival was never guaranteed, they both comprehended a stark reality that settled over them like the heavy desert dust that covered everything. From this moment forward, every single day was precious beyond measure and could very well be their final one together in this harsh world that showed no mercy to the weak. The following 7 months did not pass like ordinary time flowing steadily forward in the way that time usually does. They felt like endless layers of sand accumulating relentlessly on Neil's chest, grain by grain, particle by particle. Each day brought more oppressive weight that pressed down on her, greater difficulty drawing breath into her lungs that seemed to grow smaller, and an impossible burden to cast aside no matter how hard she tried or how much she wanted to be free of it. She lay upon a weathered wooden bed in their modest rented room, the mattress thin and uncomfortable beneath her changing body that no longer felt like her own, with barely enough light filtering through the narrow dirt-streaked window to distinguish the bright day from the dark night, the hours blending together. Her belly expanded so rapidly it frightened even her, a woman who had faced enemies without flinching and had never known fear in battle. The body that had once been the pride of an Apache warrior, strong and capable and feared by her enemies, had transformed into a battlefield where two forces struggled against each other, where each dull contraction served as a reminder that the life within was claiming its space, demanding room to grow and taking over everything. Some nights, when the pain was at its worst, Neil clenched her jaw tightly to suppress her cries of discomfort, biting down until her teeth ached, not from the pain itself which she could have borne with the stoicism of a warrior, but because fear had penetrated deep into her bones like winter cold that would not leave. She had once accepted the possibility of dying in combat with honor, a warrior's death that would be remembered in stories. But dying in childbirth represented a different kind of terror entirely, a fear that had no glory attached to it, no song sung about it by the people. It was the quiet, desperate fear of leaving something unfinished, of a life unlived, and a story without an ending, of a child left motherless before even taking a first breath. Jack remained by her side every single day without fail, a constant presence in her life that she had come to depend on despite herself. In the early morning hours, when the world was still dark and silent, he departed before sunrise painted the sky with its colors, slipping out quietly so as not to wake her if she had finally found sleep after hours of restlessness. In the evening, as shadows grew long and the heat of the day began to fade, he returned with bloodied hands torn by rough work and rope burns, and a back drenched in sweat that soaked through his shirt and made the fabric cling to his skin. But regardless of his bone-deep exhaustion that made his legs tremble and his vision blur, he never rested or sat down to catch his breath until he had ensured Neil had eaten whatever food he could afford to bring her, taken the bitter medicine the doctor prescribed that made her grimace, and experienced at least some small relief from her constant suffering that never seemed to end. He would sit beside her patiently, spoon-feeding her when she was too weak to lift her arms, talking to her softly about his day to distract her from the pain. There were moments when the pain struck so intensely it folded Neil's body inward upon itself, curling her into a tight ball of agony where she could not move or speak. Jack would immediately seize her hand, gripping it tightly with both of his weather hands, as if releasing it would allow her to slip away from this world entirely, crossing over to wherever the dead went to rest. His grip was desperate and fierce, holding on as if she were standing at the edge of a cliff, and he was the only thing preventing her from falling into the abyss below. "Do not let go," Neil whispered hoarsely on one rare rainy evening when drops pattered against the roof and thunder rumbled in the distance, her voice barely audible above the sound of the storm. "I am here," Jack responded firmly, his voice rough with emotion he could barely contain and refused to show to anyone else. "I am not going anywhere. I will stay right here with you no matter what happens." But when Neil finally slept, her breathing shallow and irregular and concerning, Jack sat alone beside the window in the darkness, gazing down at the empty street below where nothing moved except tumbleweeds blown by the desert wind that never stopped. He remembered the expression in his late wife's eyes before she died, that identical fearful look of someone slipping away from a world, and the memory haunted him in the quiet hours, refusing to leave him alone. And each night, as the hours crawled by with agonizing slowness, he questioned how profoundly he had repeated his past mistakes, walking the same painful path a second time and wondering if he was cursed to lose everyone he cared about. One particularly difficult night, when the moon was hidden behind thick clouds and the darkness seemed especially oppressive, Neil spoke softly, barely louder than a breath of wind through the window. "If I do not make it through this, do not hate the baby for it. Promise me that you will love this child." Jack turned toward her quickly, his face twisted with heartbreak at her words that cut through him like a knife. "Do not say such things," he whispered urgently, leaning closer to her so she could see his face in the dim light. "You will live. You must live. I cannot lose you too. I will not survive losing another person I love." But Neil understood the truth that he refused to accept or acknowledge. Her body was being torn apart from within by the very child it carried, the child they had created together in a moment of passion. Every small movement caused her to gasp for air desperately, her lungs struggling. Every passing day felt like a gamble with death, rolling dice with fate itself and never knowing what the outcome would be. Those final months held no heroics or brave deeds worthy of stories, only the kind of endurance that wears the soul threadbare, fraying it at the edges until there is almost nothing left. Only love demonstrated through the simplest act imaginable, remaining present when leaving would have been so much easier and less painful. And when the first wave of true labor pain struck without warning, signaling that the day had finally arrived after so much waiting and preparation, they both understood the long waiting had ended at last, and the real test was beginning. All that remained now was a raw and simple truth they could not escape: to survive this night or lose everything they held dear in this world, everything they had fought for. The pain arrived at midnight like an unwelcome visitor knocking at the door. No warning signs to prepare them, no time for gathering courage or steeling themselves for what was coming. Neil jolted awake suddenly with a gasp trapped in her throat, both hands instinctively clutching her swollen belly that had grown so large she could barely move. A violent contraction ripped through her body without mercy, so powerful and overwhelming it pulled a scream from her lips that she barely recognized as her own voice, the sound foreign and terrible and animalistic. Jack woke instantly at the sound, his eyes snapping open wide, catching only a glimpse of Neil's pale face under the flickering oil lamp's unsteady glow that cast dancing shadows on the walls around them. "It's time," she panted heavily between gasps for air that would not come easily. "It's coming now. The baby is coming, and I am not ready." There was no time to transport her to a hospital in town, no time for anything except action and quick decisions. The doctor was summoned urgently in the middle of the night, roused from his bed by Jack's desperate pounding on his door that echoed through the empty streets. And the moment the doctor stepped into the simple wooden cabin with his medical bag, his experienced eyes taking in the scene before him, he knew this birth would not be merciful or easy. It would be a battle between life and death. He motioned urgently for Jack to spread hay on the floor quickly, as fast as humanly possible without wasting a single second, creating a makeshift birthing bed that would have to serve their purposes. Neil was helped to lie down carefully by both men, her body heavy and unwieldy and difficult to maneuver. Her tall frame, once a symbol of Apache strength and resilience that had carried her through countless trials and hardships, now trembled uncontrollably under the relentless waves of unbearable pain that came in crashing swells like an ocean storm. Sweat poured from her like heavy rain during a summer storm, soaking her long dark hair and the back of her shirt completely, dripping onto the hay beneath her and creating dark patches. Another contraction hit suddenly, more brutal and unforgiving than the previous one, tearing through her body like she was being ripped in half. It's too big. I cannot bear this pain. I cannot do it. I am going to die. Neil's scream tore through the desert night air, hoarse and raw with agony that seemed bottomless and without end. She arched her body violently upward, her spine curving in an impossible angle, nails digging deep into the hay as if clinging to the last thread of life itself, holding on with everything she had left. Jack knelt behind her immediately, his strong arms wrapped firmly around her shaking body, trying to lend her his strength and will. He pressed his forehead against her back, feeling her heartbeat pounding through her skin, his voice trembling with fear and fierce determination combined into something powerful and desperate. "Look at me, Neil. Look into my eyes," he said breathlessly, his voice cracking with emotion. "You can do this. I know you can. You are the strongest warrior I have ever known in my entire life. Stronger than any man I've met on this frontier." Neil shook her head weakly from side to side, tears spilling freely from her eyes and running down her cheeks in streams. "I cannot do this anymore. I have nothing left to give. There is nothing left inside me." The doctor shouted louder than the wind howling outside their small cabin, his voice cutting through her despair like a blade. "Do not give up now. Not now. When you are so close, I can see the baby's head crowning. When the next wave hits, you must push with everything you have left, everything inside you." The next pain came like a violent storm sweeping across the plains, unstoppable and fierce and merciless. Neil screamed from the depths of her being, summoning every ounce of strength remaining inside her exhausted body, drawing from reserves she didn't know existed within herself. The strength of a woman once called too big for a woman, too different to fit in anywhere, unfit to be a mother by her own community who had rejected her and cast her out. Jack held her tightly from behind, whispering nonstop in her ear like an anchor to her fading soul, his words a lifeline in the darkness that threatened to swallow her whole. "Push now. Just one more time. You're almost there, almost done with this," the doctor yelled urgently, his hands ready to catch the child. "One more push and it's over. Your baby will be here in your arms." Neil squeezed her eyes shut tightly against the overwhelming pain that consumed her entire world. In that moment suspended in time, all she could hear was her own heartbeat pounding in her ears like drums and Jack's ragged breath behind her back, his presence solid and real and grounding. She gathered everything she had left within her, every last bit of will and strength and determination, and pushed one final time with a guttural cry that came from her very soul. Like a warrior delivering her last powerful blow in a desperate battle she had to win or die trying. And then a cry rang out into the night air, thin and weak, but unmistakably alive, unmistakably human and real. So achingly, beautifully, miraculously alive after all the fear and waiting and suffering. The room fell silent for an impossible second that felt like eternity stretching out before them, everyone frozen in place and holding their breath. Jack broke down in tears of relief and overwhelming joy, his body shaking with sobs he could not control. The doctor let out a long breath of profound relief, his shoulders sagging with the release of tension. And Neil, the woman the world had once doubted and dismissed as unsuitable and wrong, lay there on the hay completely spent, every bit of energy drained from her body, tears streaming down her exhausted face that was pale in the lamplight, but alive truly and unmistakably alive, her chest rising and falling with breath that came easier now. Dawn rose slowly over the rugged Arizona frontier landscape, painting the sky with soft colors of pink and orange. The first gentle light of day slipped through the wooden window frame carefully, touching a room still heavy with the lingering scent of sweat, bitter medicine, and the fear that had just passed through like a terrible storm that had finally moved on to other places. Neil lay still on the bed of hay, her body utterly drained of all energy, unable to move even a finger. But her breathing was finally steady and calm for the first time in hours, her chest rising and falling in a regular rhythm that was reassuring. A tiny life stirred softly against her, warm and real and undeniably alive against her skin, small fingers curling and uncurling reflexively. The baby girl let out a faint cry that was almost like a mewling kitten, then slowly settled into peaceful calm, finding comfort in her mother's warmth. The doctor smiled with genuine relief spreading across his tired face and carefully placed the tiny child, cleaned and wrapped in clean cloth, into Neil's trembling arms that could barely hold the weight of something so small. She looked down at the small face with wonder, her eyes red and swollen from crying throughout the long night of labor. The woman once called too big, too masculine, unfit to be a mother by those who judged her harshly without knowing her heart or her story, now trembled for the opposite reason entirely. Because she was still alive against all odds and expectations, and because her child was here, real and whole and perfect in her arms. Jack sat beside her on the floor, his calloused and work-worn hands covering his weathered face, unable to look at first because the emotions were too overwhelming. When he finally looked up, dropping his hands away, the tears could no longer be held back or hidden from view, and he did not try to stop them. He reached out slowly and gently touched the baby's soft black hair that was still damp from birth, as if afraid that even the slightest pressure might cause this precious moment to disappear like a dream dissolving in morning light, revealing it had never been real at all. "She is healthy and strong," the doctor said quietly with deep satisfaction in his voice after examining the child. "Both of them made it through the night. It's a miracle, truly a miracle." Jack turned to Neil in the soft morning light that was growing brighter with each passing moment, seeing her clearly for the first time in what felt like forever. She was no longer just a lone warrior of the desert fighting her battles alone against the world, nor simply the woman cast aside by her people for being different and not fitting their narrow expectations of what a woman should be. She was a mother now, exhausted beyond measure, still in pain from what her body had endured, but standing tall after the storm had passed, victorious in the way that truly mattered most. "What should we name her?" Jack asked, his voice breaking with emotion he couldn't control, barely able to form the words through his tears. Neil was silent for a long moment, looking down at the tiny face with its closed eyes and perfect features, then whispered hoarsely with great effort, "Hope. We name her Hope." She paused, gathering her thoughts and finding the words. Hope that a body once doubted and dismissed could do what no one believed possible or likely or even imaginable. Hope that terrible mistakes could be redeemed by staying when it was hard, by taking responsibility when it would have been easier to run away, by love learned slowly through pain and perseverance and not giving up even when everything seemed impossible. Hope that true strength is not never falling down or never making mistakes or being perfect, but standing back up after believing there was nothing left to lose or fight for, when everything seemed finished and over and lost forever. Jack bowed his head low and rested his forehead against Neil's hand gently, reverently, as if in prayer. "I will spend my entire life making up for my mistakes and the pain I caused you," he said solemnly, his voice thick with emotion. "I will work every day at becoming worthy of you and of her. I promise you that with everything I am. I swear it on my life." Neil did not answer with words, too tired for speech and too overwhelmed by everything. She simply squeezed his hand gently, just enough pressure for Jack to understand clearly that some forgiveness does not need to be spoken aloud to be real and true and binding between two people, that sometimes silence carries more meaning than any words could ever convey. Outside the cabin, the desert remained as harsh and unforgiving as it had always been, unchanged by human drama or the miracle that had occurred. But inside that small wooden cabin with its rough walls and simple furnishings, something had changed forever and irrevocably in ways that could not be undone or taken back. A child named Hope had been born into the world, crying her first breath of desert air. A body once called too big, too different, unfit to be a mother by narrow-minded people who could not see beyond their prejudices, had created a miracle against all odds and expectations. And sometimes the very place where others tell us we cannot succeed, where they say we do not belong or have no right to be, is exactly where life truly begins anew, where we find our true purpose and calling. My dear friend listening to this tale, the love between Neil and Jack did not grow from beautiful promises made under starlight or easy circumstances that required no sacrifice or hardship, but from fear that gripped their hearts in the darkness, from mistakes that haunted them and would not let them rest, and from responsibility they could not run from or escape, no matter how much easier it would have been to simply leave and start over somewhere else. It was forged in a brutal desert where surviving each day demanded sweat that stung the eyes and burned the skin, tears that fell in the darkness when no one was watching, and the courage to stay when leaving would have been so much easier and less painful for everyone involved. They did not love each other because life was easy or comfortable or pleasant or filled with joy, but because when everything became its absolute worst, when hope seemed lost and the future looked dark, they still chose not to let go of each other, holding on despite everything that tried to tear them apart. And perhaps that is the greatest and most important truth this story leaves with us today, the lesson we should carry forward in our own lives. Real love, true love that lasts, does not erase suffering or make pain disappear into nothing as if it never existed, but it gives people the courage and strength to walk through suffering together, side by side, supporting each other through the darkness until they reach the light on the other side. In the end, I truly and sincerely hope that all of you find peace and happiness wherever you may be in your own journey through this difficult life. I love all of you, our dear Wild West storytelling audience, who have stayed with us through this tale, and so many others before. Please let me know how you feel about this story and what it meant to you personally. Leave a comment right below this video with your thoughts and reactions. Type the number 1 if you enjoyed this story and it touched your heart in some way. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more dramatic Wild West stories coming your way very soon. Until next time, friends.